We are here to offset the mistakes humans have made over the years.
The Platte River is the main water supply for residents of the Great Plains. The river runs nearly 310 miles, all the way from Wyoming through Colorado, straight into Nebraska, and feeding into the Missouri River. The central part of the Platte River Valley flows through Nebraska and is one of the most biologically diverse ecosystems in the entire state. The river valley is home to hundreds of animals and plant species, such as the endangered whooping cranes, who land in this quiet, beautiful environment to replenish their bodies during migration. Dave Bosch estimates that over 750,000 sandhill cranes nest on the Platte in mid-March for roughly 6 weeks.
The spring migration for sandhill cranes is this is the only place it happens in the world. It's one of the greatest migration events that you'll hear about or find on the planet. And the benefits, as Roger mentioned, go way beyond the ecological realm into the economic realm. So it's a big economic booster for the local communities in this area. The migration corridor for sandhill cranes really converges on the Central Platte River. It's about a 75-mile reach where 80% of the cranes spend weeks during the spring, resting, foraging, building reserves for the breeding season. At any given time, there can be 300 to 500,000 sandhill cranes along the Platte River. Some of the birds come earlier, a few of those move on, others come in, so it's a drawn-out process, occurs from mid-February to mid-April. In the fall, though, very few sandhill cranes will stop on the Platte River or anywhere. They just migrate down, they have their one-night stops throughout the migration corridor and end up back on the wintering grounds. A little bit more about the greater and lesser sandhill cranes. They winter in Mexico, New Mexico, and Texas. They nest in northern U.S., anywhere from the Great Lakes all the way over. There are some that actually nest in Washington and Oregon in that area. And they extend on up into Canada where they nest, and Alaska, and all the way over to Siberia. So some of these birds actually migrate from Texas, the Gulf Coast, all the way up into Siberia. So it's a very extensive migration corridor, and some of these birds go a long ways between their wintering and breeding grounds. Along the Central Platte River, sandhill cranes will roost on in-channel habitat when there's ice conditions or high flow conditions. They will roost off-channel, but it's not a common event to have them roosting off the channel unless they're in another wetland type. They are omnivores. They forage on basically anything they can get in their mouth, anything from the grains to the plants and the plant roots, the tubers, insects, mice, snakes, worms. Basically, if they can get it in their mouth, they'll eat it.
The diverse ecosystem and its growing population rely on the Platte River. This dependency shrunk the Platte at an alarming rate. There are many issues such as water shortages, changing landscapes, and invasive species that threaten life along the Platte and have warranted the help of organizations such as Headwaters.
As the channel dried up, it didn't go through a succession from meadow to woodland. Basically, cottonwood and willow seedlings establish on bare sand, and during years, we've had years where you have 3 or 4 dry summers in a row where it dries out in the middle of the summer, and you get these really high establishments of trees. And if you don't get the large scouring floods the next year, those establishments start to build islands, and they even build their own soil type. Some fine sandy loams, these trees, if they're not scoured out, will catch fine sediments and build up islands. And these forested islands existed historically in the Platte at far lower numbers than they do now.
In the wild, predators are always on the prowl. Kaylee Kelton has made it her mission to figure out what predators exist on the Platte and what their habits are.
There's way more predators than what I thought would be out there. They're more active than what I thought they would be. A lot of different predators utilize the habitat of the sandpit, but they might not be out there for the birds in general or the prey out there. They're just hanging out there. Like deer really like the edges of the entrance of the sandpit. Coyotes and fox really do too, I think, because there's tons and tons of rabbits out there. So it just kind of all plays its own role in that sense. And I think owls are a big predator, but I don't know if they're necessarily out there just for our birds, or there's mice and stuff like that. So it's kind of learning, yes, these predators are out there, but why are they out there? Is it because of the birds or other prey species and stuff like that? So it's kind of cool that how to learn how all this kind of winds together and stuff like that. So still learning about it too, and I'm sure I'll learn more about it this summer.
Headwaters is at the forefront of creating new and innovative water and ecological sustainability solutions. The organization's Platte River Recovery Implementation Program is revolutionizing the ways in which we can combat the problems with the Platte. Bridget Barron, CEO of Headwaters, is currently spearheading the program.
In 2007, Jerry was hired, July 1st, 2007, so exactly 10 years later from when the program negotiations had started. And he formed Headwaters Corporation. So Headwaters Corporation is a private for-profit company. The program is our largest contract. The background of the Platte River program is that there were endangered species issues in the 3 states, Colorado, Wyoming, and Nebraska. And if you look at some of the maps around here, you'll see that the South Platte starts in Colorado, the North Platte starts in Wyoming, they converge at North Platte, Nebraska, and then become the Platte River. And so the area in Nebraska was where the birds were coming, the birds that you're going to see this evening, migrating through. But the water issues in Colorado and Wyoming were affecting the flow of the river downstream to Nebraska.
The endangered and majestic white whales of Nebraska seek refuge in the Platte River Valley during their migration back north. Whooping cranes prefer an environment that is undisturbed with a shallow river and wetlands, which this unique program is trying to conserve.
A lot of people will say, we will hear, well, that's a lot of money for just some birds. And Jerry always used to say, the birds are an indicator of the environment, which you will hear a lot of environmental people say. It's like, but it's true that, you know, if we start losing species, that should give us a heads up of something's not, you know, that's something is not right out there that we need to pay attention to.
When we first started implementing the Platte River program, there were many from the states that said, this is never going to work. You know, this is not going to happen. It's just going to be, you know, we've never done it this way before. It's, who knows how this is going to work. So I'm proud to say that, you know, they're going for an extension because the program ran from 2007 to 2019. So that was the first increment. And then it was kind of like, well, what happens after that? Well, we didn't reach the water goal. So they're asking for an extension of that, not a whole new increment, but an extension of that for another 13 years. So if we get that, that's, you know, that's quite a run of 26 years. So it's good to know that Headwaters will continue to be the implementer for the program, and it's good to know that Headwaters will continue on even after my husband and I have left and are gone. You know, that's a good thing. Yeah.
We have a good neighbor policy, which means a couple things. First of all, when we buy land, it's all willing buyer, willing seller. So, you know, for some of you that know about eminent domain or condemnation, some folks can go and basically condemn land. We don't do that. If we want to buy something, we're working with the owner. If they don't want to sell it, we move on and go somewhere else. The other part of that is we pay property taxes. So we actually have a land trust that holds the land, and we pay taxes. And not in lieu of taxes or partial taxes, actual taxes. So when my personal tax rate goes up, the program's tax rate goes up, and we pay more taxes. And then the last thing we do from a good neighbor policy perspective, if we're doing experiments or releasing water or doing something, we have insurance, and if we negatively impact somebody, then we go and make it right. So we're very committed to being a good neighbor to everyone, all the way from Lake McConaughey, where we have water stored in environmental account, all the way down. There was a lot of concern that they would create some program that would come in and take a bunch of land and make everybody mad and just basically turn the Platte River into some sort of wildlife sanctuary, which is fine if you love wildlife, but if you had a family farm that's been in your family for 150 years, you're worried that that's going to go away. Or if you own a section of the river and you like to hunt or bird watch, folks were just very worried that all that land was going to be taken out of private ownership. So the local ag community especially was very concerned about the program and that it could negatively impact basically the economy and just the feel of this area. So the good neighbor policy essentially allowed them to get over the hump and get the agreement signed. Without it, I don't think the state of Nebraska would have signed into the program.
The program's 3 main initiatives are land, water, and adaptive management.
The land goal was 10,000 acres. We exceeded that fairly early on. We're now at about 12,500 acres that we have and manage. And some of that was outright purchases, some of that is conservation easements, some of that is leases, so a variety, but over 12,000 acres at this point. And then the water goal was 130 to 150,000 acre feet. And of our 10 milestones as of 2017, the water goal is the only goal that we have not met.
Water is very important. One of our main objectives is to put between 130 and 150,000 acre feet of water back in the river every year. That's a lot of water. The Platte Basin is semi-arid, so there's not a lot of water to begin with in the first place. A lot of it gets used. So it's very expensive, it's very slow. There's basically 3 ways we can put water in the river. We can lease it, so we can find folks who decide that this year they're going to dry land their crop. And so they'll essentially lease us their water, we store it, and then we use it. So that's one way we get water. We can also conserve it. So basically you work with farmers to do things like deficit irrigation, where you're going to grow corn and you know it's going to need 12 inches of water, but you only put 10 on and you get less yield out of it, and then that extra water you again sell to the program and we can use it. It's a really hard way to get water. You're having to work with a bunch of people to get a little bit of water. And then the third thing we can do is we can retime it. So basically, when water's coming down the river, if it's coming at the wrong time, we can grab it, hold it somewhere, and then put it back in the river at the time when we need it.
Our habitat, our associated habitat area, is from Lexington, Nebraska to Chapman, Nebraska. So it's about 90 miles of habitat that we're responsible for.
There are many components to make sure that the Platte River continues to thrive, not only for mankind, but for wildlife as well.
Largely what we do for whooping cranes is widen the channel out to increase their use. We remove trees along the bank line to increase their visibility, their range of view. One thing about the reason they roost in the sandhill cranes and whooping cranes roost in the river is the water barrier provides them a buffer to predators. Just a pictorial here of what some of the results of all of our studies we've implemented to date. The red areas would indicate areas that are, based on the data, highly suitable for whooping crane use, or more suitable than the bluer areas. And so we use this modeling effort to locate areas of higher likelihood of use. One thing that impacts this heat map is vegetation. That's one thing we found is the birds don't like the narrow channels with the vegetative islands in the middle of them. Again, it decreased their visibility of predators. As you can see in this picture, you can see a very distinct boundary between where we are able to manage on the right side of the screen. I mean, it's a distinct line. That's where the stuff with the bare sand is what we own. The stuff to the right of that screen we don't own. Here's several pictures of the Platte River through time. As you can see, back in the early 2000s, the channel was fairly open, vegetation-free, a lot of bare sand, good habitat for sandhill cranes and whooping cranes. As you progress to the right, during the drought years in the mid-2000s, first purple loosestrife came in, then now Phragmites. And you can see in 2009, it had nearly choked out the entire channel. Not good habitat for sandhill cranes and whooping cranes. 2008, we began a herbicide application protocol where we spray Phragmites to control and knock it back. In the third from the left, some dead Phragmites. One thing about Phragmites, even when it's dead, it's very resistant to scouring, and so at that point we come in and start disking the sandbars up to break up the roots and free the vegetation so the islands go away. After the Phragmites spraying and disking, the channel opens back up. That's how bad the channel was choked down by the mid to late 2000s. Another management tool we have is a limited amount of water to increase flows during times of needs, whether that be to submerge sandbars to stop cottonwood generation and vegetation germination, or We do pulse flows, high flow releases to help widen the channel back out and remove vegetation.
Even though the Platte River program, what we're really concerned about is the whooping crane, because the whooping crane is the endangered species. Clearly the sandhill cranes aren't endangered because there's thousands of them. But everything that we do for the habitat for the whooping cranes helps the sandhill cranes. You get a better appreciation, I would say, of the impact that the environment has on these birds and their migration. They've been doing this for thousands of years, and as their habitat shrunk, the impact it had on them. And now that we're widening, creating sandbars, making more places for them to roost in the river, and their numbers have increased, it's a very gratifying feeling, thinking that we might have had a small part of that.
Headwaters, along with other conservation groups, are eager to continue working on the preservation of the Platte River for future generations.
I always say the 4 saddest words I know are "you should have seen." And too often we have to say that you should have seen the passenger pigeons and you should have seen the great bison migrations. But I don't want my kids to ever have to say you should have seen the migrations of the sandhill cranes on the Platte River. So that's why I'm here. I'm here for the future. I started here 21 years ago as a temporary for a 3-month gig and got caught up in the crane vortex, and I've never left.
Bill believes the future of the Platte and other fragile ecosystems lie in the hands of the next generation.
We also see anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 children in our programs every year. We do inquiry-based, hands-on programs where the kids get wet and mucky and dirty. They get in the river, they make their own explorations, so we don't tell them what nature's about. They get to learn about nature on their own terms. And we found that really truly makes a difference in the future. Creates a culture of conservation in these kids as they grow up.
Without the efforts of organizations like Headwaters, the Audubon Society, the Crane Trust, and Rose Sanctuary, children today would never get to experience the great sandhill migration. So, what can we do as individuals to ensure the water and wildlife of the Platte are there for us in future generations?
The main way you could help is to stay abreast of conservation issues. I think what Bill said about donations, well, we're also a small NGO and we do subsist on external funds to a large degree. But I think more importantly for folks who don't have that sort of ability, I think it's really important to keep your eye on these diversion projects and these dams. Our organization was funded, was formed out of the Gray Rocks Dam in Wyoming because it was going to take water out of the system, and that could be a threat to downstream habitat for whooping cranes.
I will say I'm not a birder. I was never a birder when I came here, but I always tell people you don't have to be a birder to enjoy the migration. You don't have to know anything about birds, just the sheer numbers and the experience of watching them fly in and watching them dance and congregate is an incredible spectacle that you absolutely don't have to know anything about birds to enjoy and appreciate.
I think one of the best things that we can do is continue to show progress and continue to show that we're, meeting our milestones, we're meeting our goals.
We've accomplished a lot, but there is much work yet to be done. So